You know, this bright and early on a Sunday morning. I'm sure folks have been out having extra meetings, but especially folks who haven't been in town or not from town. So making this trip over here this bright and early. Thank you for doing that. So I just want to kind of jump straight into it. And the way we, really try to do things is more kind of question and answer than just a dialogue presentation, but we will share just a little bit about where we're currently at. So folks should know that Cooperation Jackson is celebrating its 1 year anniversary this year. This month, in fact, beginning of May 1st, basically, is our birthday from 2014. So 1 year, and in that 1 year, we've acquired a little bit of land that we're going to turn into a land trust, community land trust. We've acquired a center, the Chokwe Lumumba Center for Economic Democracy and Development, when we're steady on the path of starting several cooperatives, kind of the first class urban farming, which we call it Freedom Farms, in honor of the work that Fannie Lou Hamer did in establishing the co-op called Freedom Farms in the late 1960s, early 1970s. A recycling and composting cooperative, and a cafe/catering cooperative. And this is just the beginning. We're trying to build, in many respects, a self-reinforcing, mutually kind of connected, and self-reliant set of, networks and cooperatives. In large part, because our market is still very much controlled by reactionaries, white supremacists who can easily kind of block you out of some markets. We'll talk about that in a bit. Jackson, for those of you who don't know, is the capital of Mississippi. It's the largest city in Mississippi, and is 80%, if not greater, Black. Large parts of the working class are extremely impoverished. In the city, you're talking about an unemployment rate that I would say is officially well over 50%. Most folks live off the informal economy in one form or another. So those are kind of the conditions that we're working in. The organization, for those of you who don't know, is part of a broader strategy that we call the Jackson Kush Plan. And we're just one division of that. The other two kind of divisions, our division basically is really trying to develop the material basis for self-determination within the project. The other aspects are really focusing in on building people's power through the People's Assembly and impacting the state through not just electoral politics, but engaging the state in various different ways. So that's kind of a quick summation of where we're at, just as a start. And I turn it over to Brandon.
Yeah, so, the way that we're looking at things is in a way that, like, keeping in context where we are in the world and what our climate looks like, what our environment looks like, and how are we going to sustain ourselves for the future, not only for us, but for our grandchildren's grandchildren, for generations to come. And so we're thinking very intentionally about how we're building what we're building so that we're not replicating destructive sorts of ways of doing business, destructive sort of ways of relating to each other, that will, I guess, hinder us from getting to where we need to go in the long run. And so what Kali was saying about the first class of co-ops, that's built in a way so that we're able to sustain ourselves, but also in a way that it's like building towards zero waste. If we're able to produce our own food, sell our own food in a cafe, and then have the recycling waste management co-op take whatever waste and whatever compost from that and give that back to the farm, it's a full cycle, right? And so we're thinking about that, but we're also thinking about, in terms of the community land trust and the land that we're building on, doing things in a way where we're not we're not being extractive, we're not being destructive. We're trying to operate in a way that is regenerative. And so we're looking at further down the line. So the first sort of steps in terms of developing the land that we have, we want to build the urban farms. And so some of the land, is similar to Detroit in that, Jackson has a lot of blighted property, a lot of abandoned buildings. And on some of the properties that we have, there are already buildings, there are already structures. And so instead of tearing those structures down, what we're thinking about doing is putting making those structures greenhouses. And so it'll be a controlled environment where we'll be able to grow produce. So that's like the first phase. But once we're able to gain more capital, we're looking into building affordable housing for the existing community that's in West Jackson, and doing it in a way where we're going to put solar panels on the rooftops. So there's going to be community farms in the back, but also building towards water catchment systems. All of these things are connected to what's necessary for our survival, and we're thinking very seriously about how we're building what we're building. And so I'm going to go back a bit and just talk a bit about what just transition is. Has anyone ever heard of that term? What have you heard about it? Go ahead.
I just associate it with the move away from fossil fuels, but building a new economy in the process of doing that is more just than one built on extractive energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically right. It's building an economy that's sustainable for life. That's non-extractive, that's non-destructive, that's, the current economic system that we live in is extremely destructive. The accumulation of capital, the accumulation of profits, it creates a culture where like you have to constantly consume, constant consumption, constant production. Even if people aren't buying things, there's still the stacks and stacks of things that aren't even used. And so how are we building our economic infrastructure where we're not replicating those same models, right? And so that's a just transition. The just transition also, I feel like it spans to like how we relate to each other, so people-centered decision-making processes in the workplace, and also having democratic control over your work environment. Those are things, and also sharing wealth, building wealth collectively. Those are different things. Those are some of the principles that we go by, and that we're working to build in Jackson. The reason that we're doing co-ops and not just, a small, just like a Black-owned business is because we see that, kind of like a corporate structure isn't necessarily, we've seen that it hasn't benefited the majority of Black people that live on this planet, and so how we shifting the ways that we're relating to each other. And, for me, it's like, growing up, it's like I've been taught that I'm a consumer. That's the only thing in this economic structure in our society that I'm capable of doing, right? But there's other aspects of the supply chain, right? There's producers, there's so thinking about how do we enter those different sectors and actually provide for ourselves and produce for ourselves, so, I remember Kali saying just in terms of, the recycling and waste management, it's not just about taking the recycle and like, shipping it off to a place where it can be processed. How are we thinking about like repurposing the own recycling products that we get, right? So that we're able to have our own infrastructure, right? So that so we don't have to rely on outside markets in order to be able to survive. I feel like that's what self-determination means to me. you know, to be able to be in control of your own circumstances, you know, to be able to be in control of your own destiny. And so that's the work that we're engaged in. That's what we're building down in Jackson.
And I just questions and answers. So another broader thing in the Mississippi context, you know, most folks think of agriculture when you think of Mississippi, and that's still true. Timber being kind of the largest agricultural product, you know, in the state. But Mississippi is also a haven for toxic dumping. And a lot of folks don't know that. Companies from all over the country and all over the world have been using parts of Mississippi to dump toxic waste. And in a lot of the way that some of the production is done, particularly of fish, chicken, pigs, the way it's managed, extremely toxic, extremely destructive. And those are some key industries in our state. So there's an element of, you know, our piece of fighting against environmental racism and destroying, you know, the intentional destruction of the environment, you know, of the area and the region, primarily because of the area is so poor and so politically weak that corporations can just use it as a backwater in many respects without, you know, very little political regard or political consequence. So that's something that we're working to change, and we have to change, you know, in terms of like long-term viability. And they're starting to run into a contradiction now, because even though the way cotton was produced seriously depleted a lot of the soils of Mississippi, some of the regenerative pieces that have been intentional and unintentional, a lot of that soil is still some of the richest in the world. And so there's a lot of foreign companies who have been on the rush to buy up a lot of land, particularly in Africa. They're starting to do the same thing in Mississippi, understanding that Mississippi has one of the largest aquifers, you know, around. It's constantly fed because of the Mississippi. There's the Mississippi River. So good land and water. Folks are looking for a long-term trajectory of where I want to get my food from. Mississippi's starting to become a switch in that regard. So we're going to be running up, and we already are running up, not only just kind of some of the local reactionary capital, but international capital that's kind of looking at this picture and starting to make a shift. So us moving on hard and fast is very critical, you know, for the success of the overall political project. So just want to kind of put that in context. So with that, like we said, we got like an hour and a half, and we can easily fill it up with just talking hands, but we're sure you guys have a lot of questions. And we want to dialogue and learn from some of the work that you all are doing. So we open it up. Please state your name when you, so folks know.
Andrea from New York City. I'm just wondering, how would the community land trust work?
Good question. I mean, let me put some of that in context. Where we're trying to do it is in a portion of West Jackson, which is one of the oldest Black parts of the city of Jackson, Black communities of Jackson. And folks, you know, Jackson didn't become majority Black until like the mid-1980s. So it was late in that regard. And the white flight was rapid. I mean, you're talking about majority white to majority Black in the span of like 15 years. So the turnaround was real quick. And even before that, in the 50s and 60s, the white flight wasn't initially from Jackson. It was the other parts of that wound up being incorporated in Jackson. So like South Jackson, parts of North Jackson, and the infrastructure that they wanted up building was very poor, and we're still living with that, right? It was like this quick retreat. But the part of what's going on is there's a major gentrification push that's in play, that's been designed, and is largely being built around a medical mall that's going to do a kind of experimental research, ethnomedicine as they're calling it, which really focus on, you know, we have all these diabetes and obese and folks, so they ain't focused on changing the conditions. They just gonna profit off of the misery of the folks and you know, how can we capitalize more on you know, medicines to treat diabetes and X, Y, and heart disease and stuff like that. But they're doing this huge complex in the middle of the city that Governor Bryant, who's the present governor, supported, but It was Haley Barbour who set this up, who was the previous governor. They already got through primarily through eminent domain a good chunk of the city that they're cordoning off. And the only thing that's really kind of stopping it at this point, or slowing it down, they ain't stopping it. The only thing that's really slowing it down is the football stadium. Jackson State's football stadium is right in the middle of this area. And they haven't figured out where they want to put it just yet and how they're going to do it. So once they kind of figure that out, then it's on. And, as you can imagine, they're not, there's no great programs or great commitment towards developing Black doctors, anywhere in the country so much anymore. Cuba's doing more of that than I think is being done in the United States in total right now. So just think about that. But, once this is developed, all the technicians and doctors and other specialists and the administrators, all that stuff, they're not going to want to commute. Most of them are not going to want to commute 30, 40 minutes from some other place, especially when the land right next to you is dirt cheap. You can, buy like a plot of land with nothing on it, or even a plot of land with some old house on it. You might pay like at most $20,000, for an old house and a plot of land. And the building codes and regulations in Mississippi are fairly lax. So, you could build a mansion and the taxes on it would probably be fairly low, etc. So we know that that's coming, right? And they're already, starting to buy up large tracts of land all along the kind of corridor strip right around it. Where we're at and where we're positioning ourselves at is a little bit south of that, at kind of a gateway point to where traditionally the working class used to go, from the surrounding communities in West Jackson into the downtown area. This area is a little bit north of the downtown area, but it's along the track of what, eventually just look at the capitalist logic they want to take. So part of it, why I'm answering this way, because the part of it is, there's a race. Quite honestly, there's a race. And there's a race for us and forces like us in the city to try and acquire as much of this cheap land as possible and then decommodify it, take it off the market. So that's the first aspect of the land trust. Is for us, it's just acquisition as much as we can and trying to hold as much as we can. And I'm saying it that way because typically you want to have more of a democratic process and, like broader level of buy-in from the community for all phases of it. But we're in a situation where since their game plan is more advanced than ours and they got far more capital than us to operate, we gotta move quick. And so we're simultaneously purchasing and building community buy-in, as we go along, which is not that hard because we're a part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement and the whole plan is a part of that. And folks have built relationships in that community. And the house I lived in is one of our members' house. He was born in that house, lived in that neighborhood all of his life. Most of the neighbors are related to him. So it's not like it's a hard stretch, but there still is a reality of folks who don't have much capital, don't have access to much capital, seeing things deteriorate. They're still getting a confidence building, like, can we really do this? Is this really possible? Or y'all selling a pipe dream? We still have to deal with that. And that's going to take some time, I think, really to overcome. But the ultimate thing is, having that community be the governing democratic body which determining what's going on with that land, and making sure that folks aren't displaced, which is a large piece. That neighborhood in particular, home ownership is about 45% Black home ownership. The majority of it is renters, and most of those owners of those houses are, the white families that lived there in the 50s, 60s, who just hold on to it, who are using it as rental spaces. So there's still a dynamic we're going to have to face. Is a part of the game is as we get the trust and we make improvements with the capitalist logic, we're actually, improving their property values, right? And so you wind up being in a situation where our success might price us out to a certain extent if we're not careful, just given the logic of the game. So there's a lot of things that we have to factor in. But, building that base is the only thing that's really going to protect it in the long run. And then trying to get it in such a manner that, we translate a different type of ownership into a piece, because typically the only way you can kind of halt gentrification is you own, right? But even that's not a great protection, because you got a lot of, like in our neighborhood, you got a lot of older Black folks whose kids now live California, here in New Orleans, Atlanta, whatever. Some of them ain't never planning on coming back, at least at this point. And, somebody drops, I got 120,000 in cash for a house that's worth $40,000. What you gonna do? Most people are gonna take that money, right? Even though they own, most folks gonna take that money, unless we provide an alternative to that. So that we got a hard road ahead of us. Any other?
So you mentioned how a lot of the folks you're working with are very embedded in the community, been there a very long time, many generations. But this new medical complex, I think that sort of project seems to be happening everywhere. Healthcare seems to be a growth industry, and it seems to be a way of gentrifying parts of a lot of cities, particularly I think in the Northeast and Midwest. That seems to be the plan. And in Albany, where I grew up, there's a very similar project. And even though people have been in the community for a very long time and have deep roots there, there is always that tendency to say, well, this means some jobs, maybe not the doctor jobs, but something, construction even. And I'm wondering how you have those conversations, what they sound like when people say, this is not good long term, maybe for our community. They might acknowledge that, but they will also say, like, I need a job tomorrow. I need that, and that's what they might be offering. I'm just wondering how those conversations happen.
Yeah. So I feel like it's a mix, right? Like, so I think that there's a push. I remember, so when Chokwe was in office, there was a push to have jobs for Jacksonians, right? And so a lot of the times in Mississippi, Black people didn't have access to those contracts. So the folks who were building up Jackson actually weren't Jacksonians, and so like the folks who have access to the city contracts are folks that live in Brandon, Mississippi, they live in Madison, live in Flowood, and so they're making money off of building Jackson, right? And so if this is coming and this is inevitable, one thing that we're gonna push for is to make sure that folks in Jackson are a part of building, right? And that's kind of like, and that's like a short-term gain, but it's the long term is that being real about what this medical corridor is about, and like how it is actually about pushing them out. And I feel like there's a miss, because like having conversations with folks, people are like, they want some economic like viability. They want things to do in Jackson. They want, they don't want to have to keep going to Memphis or to New Orleans or to Atlanta every weekend, to have fun. And so when they see development, as a way for like, it's gonna bring opportunity. It's gonna bring things, So it's like, how do you have that conversation in a way that like, how can we have control over? We don't have to rely on outside capital to be able to do what we need to do for ourselves. And actually, this outside capital is not concerned about us benefiting from whatever they build, And so I know, like, just from doing street outreach and talking with folks about it, people want to see something. People want to see something happen. And when they see construction, when they see the condos being built, a lot of times their impression is that there's going to be more development. But that process has been happening for a while. And, downtown Jackson is in a constant state of construction. Constant. It's never really getting built. Nothing, the roads aren't ever really fixed. But like, contractors are constantly making money though, right? They still getting money, but nothing's actually being developed, And so I feel like that's, I don't know if the answer is it directly, but like that's kind of, those are the dynamics we're dealing with.
So people have kind of just realized or internalized the fact that development does not mean necessarily anything for them.
that part is clear,
Mhm.
you know, because, you know, one of the things that we're trying to work on doing though in that context, is fighting some of the own reactionary tendencies amongst the people in the community. And what I mean by that, you know, is that there is a certain level of anger and resentment on, you know, to whatever low-level jobs that there are, you know, more and more starting to go to Latino immigrants.
Mhm.
And so there's a, you know, that's deliberate. We all know that that's deliberate and intentional. And there's not a lot of Latino immigration in Mississippi, period. You know, just because of the nature of the economy, and it's not, you know, it's just not a robust place to go. If you're looking to make a livelihood, that ain't the first stop that you want to go for pretty much for anybody. But that's there, you know what I mean, in terms of you walk around, you know, see some whatever jobs are there, people moving dirt from this side of the street to that side of the street and moving back the next day. You know, that's there, and they like, people are making some money, but it's not folks in this community. So that's there. And so part of some of our work that we've been trying to do, you know, building a long-term alliance and relationship, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement helped to set up a coalition called the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance. And trying to do it in such a way as like, okay, if we do the infrastructure and the education and greet folks and you know, politicize folks as they're coming in, is actually a benefit to us to change the historic dynamics of and have more control over the politics by some of the population numbers. So trying to think ahead and not be kind of in a reactionary community against community with another community, pretty much, you know, splitting the spoils, right? But there is that. You just, you know, folks want to eat and they see somebody else making $2, you know, that's $2 more than they would. So that is, you know, something that, you know, we kind of have to fight and I think kind of get prepared for. But there's no great expectation that whatever's coming, that the Black community is going to benefit. There is not that, not amongst the working class. And then you got a dynamic, you know, in Jackson where tons of skilled workers, tons of skilled workers. People do
Carpentry,
whatever,
plumbing,
you know, real,
brick mason.
you know, no shortage of that. You know, but folks are systematically left out of the being able to be a major contractor because the bonding piece is ridiculously high. You know, to get into that market. Not that there are Black folks who don't have the capacity and capability of doing it, but don't have the access to the capital to even get into that game. So there's a crew, roughly about, you know, maybe 10 Black contractors, of which there's like 3 quote unquote top Black dogs. And they're all front for white companies. You know, one of them doesn't even own their own equipment. You know, like just poses of the affirmative action. I can go to the city and get this contract, and I got the bonding requirements on paper, but he's directly tied to, you know, the contracting, white contracting benefits that put him up. And everybody knows Jackson's such a place, it's kind of so small.
Any hires whites also only, or Mexican?
Primarily Latinos. Most in Mississippi, it's mainly El Salvadorans, a lot more Central Americans than folks from Mexico.
My name is Kim. I come from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And from what you're saying is that even in Rocky Mount itself, there are, I mean, not Rocky Mount, but North Carolina itself, there's a lot of co-ops coming up. And there is an impression that I'm getting that people are seeing co-ops as like an emancipatory transition. And I think that that's, and if you're working from the ground up, it sounds like a really great thing to get into. I have 2 questions. One is that Jackson, Mississippi, and all of Mississippi has a very rich history of struggle and education, and it kind of has been a stronghold of SNCC. And so it seems to me that, number one, how you go about educating, you know, the people of color or the people who are involved in struggle on the continued struggle against the bigger picture, right, which is capitalism. That's one question. The second is that what you speak about, which is really important is the capitalist encirclement of the co-op and how that you can reach out and really be a beacon in the Black Belt South. And that, you know, there seems to be a lot of co-ops and how you can link those things so that you can sort of help each other out or maybe support each other. Because this, if from what you're saying, the transnational corporation is going to come in, it's going to be very fierce struggle. And they're not going to be carrying around. They'll just slaughter you guys in the sense that even if it's just a local, even if it's support of the local community or whatnot. I mean, you know, just like they encircle Cuba and Venezuela and all that. So those are kind of like questions.
I can start with the first one. So yeah, I feel like co-ops are cool. I mean, but co-ops in it of itself, I don't think is particularly transformative. I feel like something that we are very intentional about is not having any bones about our politics and what we're about, you know, being about Black self-determination. I feel like, and just my short experience being, you know, connected to the co-op world, I've seen a lot of the things in those society, in that sector kind of reinforce some of the same sort of destructive, sort of the same like white supremacist kind of ways of relating. You know, so I feel like it's important to be clear that the form isn't necessarily transformative. You know, I feel like the content really makes what it's about. The other thing too is, yeah, I feel like the history is very important, and we do a lot of political education and try to share with folks, and also a lot of learning, you know, because we're connected with folks who are part of the U.S. Federation of Cooperatives, the Southern Federation,
Cooperative Southern Federation.
Yeah.
Federation of Southern Cooperatives.
Federation of Southern Cooperatives, and Mississippi Association of Co-ops, and they are agricultural cooperatives, you know, and so like rural areas in Mississippi have been doing co-ops for years. And, you know, one thing that I learned is that, you know, back during the time when folks were, you know, fighting for voting rights, and, you know, you were a sharecropper on a farm. You know, this happened to Fannie Lou Hamer. She was a sharecropper, you know, was working at a job, and, you know, her boss found out, you know, that she had went to vote, and so she lost her job, you know, and so you don't have your, you know, you don't have your means of subsistence. You don't have a way to take care of yourself. And actually it was the Black farming cooperatives that kind of took people in, right? You know, and so helped them to be able to provide for themselves, but also they were part of, you know, building Freedom Farms and building and being a part of a co-op. You know, I feel like that's a part that gets left out in our history a lot. We don't focus a lot on, you know, in the civil rights movement, we talk about kind of the legislative kind of way we're going about things, but we never really address the economic sort of like who were supporting, how were people feeding themselves, you know, and I feel like the farming cooperatives, the Black farming cooperatives were the folks that were doing that. And I feel like, to be real about it, they, you know, dealing with Jim Crow, it is very serious kind of situation where, like, you know, they would have to protect their produce with armed guards, you know, because the Klan would try to sabotage, you know, try to burn down their produce, so they wouldn't be able to feed themselves, but also so they wouldn't be able to make money, right? You know, and so knowing that the conditions were very, very serious and very tense, and also knowing that there's been a history of sabotage, there's been a history of massacres, there's been a history of killing people, you know, killing Black people for them trying to be in control over their own circumstances, you know, and so I feel like connecting with that history, and you know, I feel like people in Jackson kind of have a deeper sense of understanding of where we are right now, you know, because it's like, you know, we shouldn't have any illusions about how far the state will go to destroy us.
And in Mississippi, I think we have some luxury of no illusions in the sense of, there's no convincing folks that white supremacy and reaction is alive and well. I mean, it's very visceral, very clear. The language has gotten a little bit more sophisticated sometimes, but sometimes not. If you just turn on some of the Mississippi, they live feed all of not all, parts of the legislative session, and just some of the crap that they just be opening and they're talking, you would be amazed. The encirclement piece, that's a real piece, and part of our thinking and strategy on that. We're very clear that we have to take care of home base, but if we don't have allies and networks and solidarity elsewhere, that isolation could lead to, like you said, us being pretty much stomped out. So we're trying to be very intentional in building relationships. So one of the formations that we're working on building is called Friends of Cooperation Jackson. And so there's a chapter which is working and operating here in New York City. And we're working on doing that throughout the country, but also being very intentional and deliberate around, reaching out to the Caribbean, South America, and the rest of the world, and trying to, in some ways, inverse the logic of neoliberalism, to where, the way the game has pretty much been set up, some aspects of the rules make it easier for us to bypass local markets and go straight towards international markets. So in the reverse sense, that it's easier for us to do that type of business than it was a generation before. So where Black farmers might have totally been, totally excluded from any kind of a market 2 or 3 generations before, it's much harder for them to do that now by the rules of the game that they themselves set up. Now we know that they don't play fair, they don't play consistent. The free market is a total joke. So we're not necessarily relying on that, but we're gonna do everything we can to reach out and try to break that encirclement and break that isolation. So that's a key part of the strategy. So it's taking care of home base and reaching out, and being very clear about learning those lessons of the past. You know what I mean? Because it's not like in the history of if folks check out, if there's a book called Collective Courage by Jessica Gordon Imhart, which is about Black folks building cooperatives in the past 150, almost 200 years. And there's a consistent story of folks being, building up their capacity to actually sustain themselves and be brought to business, and then being very intentionally shut out, by the broader forces of reaction and capital to very intentionally choke it off. Us knowing that history and studying it, with trying to be very intentional on reaching out in each and every place that we can, which is one of the reasons why we're here. Come in and share, folks, this is what's going on. So if you see, if you ever hear some mess about, they're messing with Jackson, there's a broader network of folks that we can email, Twitter, call, hey, we need some help, and we need some solidarity. So we anticipate that's real, and the way I was saying earlier, the way Mississippi's market is structured, and there's a lot of things on the local level they can't do, but they're also leaving themselves vulnerable, on certain fronts, I should say. So, like in the food supply chain piece, they're just, the way things are going kind of right now, there's large parts of the Black community where it's just virtual food desert, and everybody got to eat, or else you're not going to be here too long. So that's something that we are planning on definitely tapping into it in the way that, you ain't got to go 5 miles to Walmart. There's an option down the street, so that's something that we're working towards.
Hi, Lillian. I'm from New York. I had a few questions, and thank you so much. You've given me so much to think about. few things is, I know that you've mentioned access to capital, sort of like what you're up against. I'm curious to know what your strategy has been to access capital. Sort of related to that, I've been hearing a lot more in sort of the philanthropy space about a Southern strategy and doing more in the South, and there's been a very history of philanthropy trying to come in and think that they're sort of serving and investing, and I'm just really curious to know what your thoughts are about philanthropy and sort of where they are now and the sort of receptivity. I really appreciated your comment around the Mississippi Immigrant Rights Alliance, and I think more and more we're seeing in so many places just the shifting demographics, and also coming with that has been racial tension and sort of this black-brown divide. And I think that there's a real need to have conversations around the fact that whether we're Mexican, Central South American, Black, African, we're all struggling with different forms of oppression and exploitation and discrimination. And so how do we come together and doing some real multiracial organizing, and sort of how do we build that together? And so I'm really curious because I keep confronting these questions around, well, people are taking our jobs and, and sort of that kind of perception or misperception. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, just to start, in the long run, most of the stuff we do is going to have to be self-financed. I mean, that's at least in the initial stages. We welcome any and all, support that philanthropy or folks want to loan, but it's got to be on our terms. Otherwise we'll what's the saying? We'll thug it out. One way or another. And to this point, I mean, there's been there is a bit of some renewed focus that we're at least hearing about a greater concentration of resources in the South, and Mississippi being one of those. So you got that Kellogg, Robert Wood Johnson, a few others that are trying to do some work, and have been there for a minute. Some of them have been there for a minute, so it's not like it's particularly new. And they're kind of developing their strategy. And our forces in particular didn't necessarily relate to that, quite honestly. The Malcolm X grassroots movement has a great historical tendency of we're not a 501c3, and we've never really quite played that game. That doesn't mean that individual members haven't worked for 501c3s and built relationship with organizations that are. But for our core work, it's like if we have to do it ourselves, because it could get turned off and then we are, basically. But I mean, part of the strategy is us doing our self-finance, and then reaching out to allies and partners to get them to understand both the necessity of building something with some real capacity and strength in the South, and that this is a broader movement question in the United States of making that investment. And that's a great appeal that we're trying to have folks doing, is say, look, we're not asking you for $1 million. If everybody in here just gave $100 a year, that's much more money than you think. And if we can get 1,000 people doing that, we can get 2,000 people doing that, you're talking about, that's $200,000 in capital right there. Just from 2,000 people across the country being organized to support a project like this. That's doable. Like, that's not beyond the reach of what the movement in the U.S., given all of its weaknesses, has the capacity to do. It does have the capacity to do that. Now, will it make a commitment to do something like that? That's another question. So that's part of our organizing, articulating the message, getting people to understand it. So there's work that we got to do. It's not just a one-sided affair. But that's the next level of the strategy of going to our folks directly. Going to you all and say, hey, look, we need some support. $5, $10. Trust me, $5 in Mississippi, it goes a long way. You're out here wasting money in New York City. With $10 coffees, and we can do some amazing things with $10 in Mississippi. So as we might even make me think on my feet, we might stop, no coffee today, donate that to Cooperation Guys, something like that. But no, on the serious side, that's it. But then there is a broader piece of a larger strategy we are trying to tap into to help develop. So part of the just transition piece, there's a link that's being put together. I think really started out of folks in California, Movement Generation, talking to a lot of the folks in 350.org and the students who are doing the divestment work. I think primarily trying to get their campuses divest from all the different fossil fuels. And now there's a prison component of that, which is beginning to build up. We're tapped into that. And we're one of the pilot sites of the Our Power campaign. And a large part of how that's being set up is so that some of those money that's being divested, have it reinvested in communities that do strategic work. So we're part of that thinking and some of that planning of being able to try to tap into some of that and direct that in some concrete ways. So there's different levels of strategies that we're looking at, but at the base of it still is, should that all sounds good. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, we still have to rely on ourselves, to move whatever we can move. So that still comes down to a fundamental basis. So it's not being closed. It is trying to be intentional. It is trying to look out. It is reaching out to some sources of progressive finance that exists in the world. There are small little pockets of folks who want to do that. And there are a growing number of folks who particularly younger folks, primarily white, but not exclusively, who have made money in the financial market, who kind of understand this game is up. Exploiting the earth in this manner is not going to last long. And some of them just for their own self-interest, like, I want the planet to be around to keep my privilege, and which means I need to make some adjustments on how I do things. They're coming to some conclusions. And so trying to relate to them and move them further in a different direction is still part of the challenge. But I think there are resources out there. I think the critical thing that I think we are really trying to confront that is a bit of a challenge for us is what Brandon said. We're very open about our politics and not trying to hide or just trying to do co-ops for co-op's sake. That's not the point. If this doesn't lead to, transforming people's lives, and it just winds up being another job, that doesn't, what's the point of doing that? So for us, again, that's what I'm saying, it's a part of a broader strategy. And there are tons of cooperatives that are out there that are not transformative in the least, that are not democratic. We got a bunch of them in Mississippi. They're the utility company. They're co-ops in names. They've been around for a long time, right? But they're as undemocratic as they come. You know what I mean? So we can't be fooled by the form, thinking that the form in itself is going to be a liberator tool. That's not. Don't. If you walk away with any here, don't walk away with that. We have to make it a viable piece, and it's got to be led with politics in command.
Our second question, though, it's just, it's really, hi, everybody, I'm Dara, and like hella late, apologize. But her second question about Black Brown solidarity too. I was just gonna say that,
Sorry.
something that you actually lifted up in some of the work with like Movement Generation, that work is actually very much multiracial and very much rooted in, how do we get out of extractive like ways of being with each other too, and being rooted on principles. And so I don't know if that's like an example of something, Global Justice Alliance, like some examples of how folks are strategically working together in issue-based ways. But so it sounded like you kind of touched on her second part of that inadvertently, but it'd be great to talk.
Yeah.
No, we're very intentional about organizing the immigrant community. We're very intentional about building those relationships, and tapping into that, I think folks have done a pretty decent job with that. So like if some of the critical support that Chokwe received when he was running for mayor, there was basically a third world alliance, at least on the finance end, that helped to make that quietly as it was kept. But the Indian and the Sikh Association, came out, gave some money. They did a lot of campaigning stuff. The Nigerian and the Ghanaian, they have their own, each piece that they do. Mira did a ton of work. It was a core part, and still some of its members still a core part of the People's Assembly. So there's a very much intentional, Black self-determination being at the center, but it's not an exclusive space or an exclusive politics. It's a broader politics of socialist transformation, that we're a part of. And so, being very clear and intentional, everybody, including white working people, everybody's welcome in this tent. Cooperation Jackson is not a Black only organization. Some of the key people in the organization, both recycling and urban farming, white working class, folks who were born and raised with several generations in Mississippi. One of them, straight up got some memory history with openly in the Klan. That was in the Klan.
Okay, I thought you said that.
Yeah, so he's developed his own radical politics and was a leader in the Occupy movement before, and has been very close. So we've been very, look, if these are our politics, these are our principles. You can accept that, roll with it, work in a democratic way. Everybody's welcome, right? But also being very clear and strategic and for our process and goal. There's some clear figures. We're trying to win 10% of the white working class population to a radical politics in our state. That's the crux. We can win that. A lot of things can shift in Mississippi, right? Because that cuts off that reactionary majority, right? And it's very clear, very concrete, like we got to win this. We got to build relationships and alliances to do this, and as immigrants come in from all over the world of different classes, some people coming with the HB, some people just coming however they can get there, we got to bring all them in and say, hey, first we need you to know, you on stolen land, and there's folks here that you need to understand their history and the struggle, the genocide that took place. Then you need to understand the enslavement that took place, and us being here, why we here, and the brutality and the horror that we dealt with here. And then you need to understand the brutality that the people who still run this plantation are prepared to commit. So don't be played by the tricks of them giving you $1 more than me, thinking that you're gonna have a better deal added in the long run. Because the second you step out of line, they're gonna try to put you back in check. And understand people, if you want a consistent ally, your consistent ally is ultimately gonna be the Black working class. It may not deliver you a lot of money, it may not, do all this other kind of stuff. But the folks, when the chips are down and they, trying to burn down your house, it's pretty much gonna be us you're gonna have to run to. So you might as well just get in and get in with us and break bread with us and start working with us now. That's kind of the basic and very intentional approach. And like I said, there's this, long-standing, relationships and a lot of intentionality around us helping to build Mira, and trying to say like, hey, the way capitalism, globalization is taking place, folks is being displaced from their land and from their homes all over the world. And rather than taking a reactionary kind of stance to it, because that same level of destruction is we faced a certain level of it being kind of canary in the mine, we might as well deal with it and try to deal with it in a progressive way, because it actually could help change some things on the ground, for us. But the education work to lay that foundation has to be done. So there's still a lot of work on that level that has to take place. And I think one of the key things that we're trying to figure out how to do and how to finance is teaching more black folks Spanish. That's one of our long-term, projects of, most of the folks around you, almost everybody to the south either speaks Spanish, French, or Portuguese, right? And English is the dominant language of money and trade, so you can kind of get away with, not knowing anything if you want to, but the rest of the world is not moving in that direction, right? So you catch up, don't get left behind. And I want to be able to speak to 50 million people who look like me in Brazil that speak Portuguese. That don't make no sense not to.
Yeah, most of the Black people in the Western Hemisphere don't speak
Students
English.
don't speak English. There was a couple hands, one here, one.
Start. My question builds on this alliance building work and two pieces. One is, can you share a little bit about the upcoming assembly that you have on the climate justice? And Dara, if you can share about what you're doing as a Friends of Cooperation Jackson. What does that look like in New York? And how does that fit in with this bigger alliance building strategy?
Yeah, we can do that. And this,
So there were two back here and one over here.
That was my point, was just that, because some people have been leaving, is that computer set up if people want to become sustainers?
Yes.
I love how you just set it up, yes.
And also if people are not ready to do that, if the information is right up. So that was mine.
Did everybody sign this sheet?
No,
Okay, so maybe we can pass it around just in case people. Because we definitely want to keep in touch with you. We can just.
Can't ask a question about how is this being funded without saying, well, actually.
Actually, yeah. So do you want me to speak about that so that people can kind of do that? Great, so, this, we're gonna talk about that too. So Friends of Cooperation Jackson, we actually launched a New York chapter officially last night. So, we are definitely welcoming all of you to join us. And what it means to be a friend of Cooperation Jackson, you all have heard about the amazing work happening there and the needs to sustain the work, to be an ally for the work, and to be a champion for the work. And so we're building these chapters in different cities of people who are supporting the work. And what it means is a variety of things. One is to become a sustainer. So we're inviting people to become a monthly sustainer. This is monthly income that we know that Cooperation Jackson can rely on from us as sustainers, right? And so there are various ways to do this too, to break it down. So the computer is right here too, and there are various increments. So if you can do $5 a month, right? How many people drink coffee? Tea? How many people pay for it? I should say that too. Right? Are there unnecessary things, not unnecessary, excuse me, for the coffee drinkers who need their coffee. But if there are things that we could perhaps go without, and think about really how do we invest our dollars, and also time. I'll talk about the time part too, but how can we invest our dollars and our resources into things that we believe in, right? And that matter and that are creating real tangible change for our communities. And this is not just about Jackson, although Jackson is very, very important. This is about something that is beneficial to all of us. This is a model that can have national and international implications for us all, right? And so how do we invest, again, those the coffee dollars and the tea dollars and for me, I got some going out drinking dollars that I definitely am investing in Cooperation Jackson now, right? And so you can do different increments per month, $5, $10, $20, you'll see up there $35, $50 per month and it'll come out regularly and us collectively, contributing to Cooperation Jackson, right? So feel free during any parts of this and absolutely before you leave, don't forget to sign up with us to become a friend and become a sustainer. You can easily do it over there, and then I can help whoever might need help as well. So that's the sustainer part. The other part about being an ally and a champion is coming together, just really, really learning from Cooperation Jackson around the principles, the actual work that's been happening too, and helping to educate other people, our other networks, our other circles about this transformative work, right? This very critical work, and so educating our communities around solidarity economies and so all democratic economies, right? So all the things that Cooperation Jackson is modeling. And then, down the line to like markets, right? So, did you talk about ownership of the food system and that kind of stuff too, right? So, imagine, right? We have distribution happening and growing happening and distribution happening and production happening, in Jackson, how do we create an alliance to support those markets as well too? So that's down the line as well. So just really thinking how we can create infrastructures to be really great allies and comrades in this work all over. Does that make sense? Is that cool?
So online, you can find information on.
Yeah, so on our website, on the homepage, it's one of the tabs you can click on that says Become a Sustainer. And then a whole list of different increment amounts will come up.
And that's that page.
And that's that page right there. Yeah.
But again, I highly, yeah, we can just pass the computer around too, but I highly recommend, because we always talk about tomorrow, and tomorrow never what comes sometimes, right? And so I really, really, really strongly encourage folks to really take advantage of today, right? We're all here together, we're all, in solidarity with Cooperation Jackson, we're all very much impressed, right, and moved by, or is it just me, maybe? Can I get a, right? I can feel it, right? So let's take this opportunity to join friends and also to become a sustainer.
But to your piece, there's a card that's going out, the PMA, the People's Movement Assembly that we're doing, which is also part of the Sum of Our Power, which is part of the Our Power campaign, which grew out of the Climate Justice Alliance, of which we're a part of. We became a part of that through another alliance, the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance. We're part of the GGJ Alliance. And what we're really trying to do with this piece is create some more space in our context, to have a broader and deeper conversation around what the just transition means, what does sustainability really mean in Jackson, and for us, it's also pushing the agenda forward around, a zero waste city. And so that's one of the things, this summer in the fall that we're going to be working on. We're building some support and allies on the city council for the official kind of transition piece, but it's going to take a lot more than that to really move a policy like this, within like a 10-year period, which it would actually probably take to make that, the different kind of capital infusions and then changing people's behavior through educating them around why you need to do X, Y, and Z, because it's not just going to happen automatically. So we're primarily calling folks throughout the South, to come join with us in this PMA. For us to all learn and share about what's been going on. Some of the why the South, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons I want to just highlight right now, the time we got, some of the major environmental catastrophes that have happened in the past, 10 years have been concentrated in the South. Louisiana, Mississippi suffered two of the worst. The BP oil spill, and Hurricane Katrina. And most folks don't understand Hurricane Katrina was a major environmental disaster. All those oil rigs, particularly in Louisiana, and all the sludge and all the stuff, and then very intentionally bursting some of those levees so that they could redirect where that went into, to the poor and Black communities. That was very intentional. There was one reason I was in New Orleans for a couple of years, right after Hurricane Katrina, almost 3 years. And ultimately what forced me to leave was the environmental conditions. It was just killing my health. It was parts of New Orleans where I couldn't be like more than an hour before my asthma started kicking up. And that was just my body telling me, you don't need to be here. This place is effed up. You really don't need to be here, which means that the people who were living there didn't need to be here. They may have had the asthmatic reaction that I had, but they were still ingesting the same thing that I was ingesting that's going to impact their body in a different way. And they didn't really clean up that stuff in a lot of the places. They just kind of moved it along, but you got to go deep into the soil and into the water. And New Orleans is a place where, you dig a couple of feet, almost anywhere in the city, you're going to actually, get to some swampland, you'll get to some water, because it's basically just a big old fishbowl. So that was large throughout. So there's a serious environmental struggle that's going on, in the South, and it's very much, dealing with some of the climate change pieces as well. Climate change is not the future. Climate change is now. That's the thing I think folks got to realize, and what that means. So, like in Southern Louisiana, parts of southern Texas and Mississippi, but particularly in Louisiana. Louisiana is losing, I think it's now about a football size of land almost every hour to the seed reclaiming. So if you actually look at a real current map, you know, you think of Louisiana that you see on the map historically, don't look like that no more. You actually go look at it on the map, there's large parts of southern Louisiana, all that's there is the road. Not the land that you used to see. All that's there is the road, because the sea is already reclaiming, you know, a lot of that and destroying people's livelihoods. You know, the fisher folk from Vietnam and the indigenous folks totally being pushed out, you know. And then you add on top of that, you know, what the BP spill is still producing, you know, what they're still seeing from it's a major issue. So it's not like this is a sideline issue or just a hot topic, you know, kind of thing or a fad of the day. You know, for us, it's like we know this is coming. And then given that so much of the South, the way it was built, so much of the South, historically built, is from sediments, you know, from the Mississippi River and some of the other rivers, so it's very low. And if you look at, you know, some of the projections of how the seed might rise, there's large parts of Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, and almost all of Florida that's going to be underwater. All right, so how do we start dealing with that now? You know, that's a large part of what this this PMA, which is a part of the 2015 Social Forum, that's what we're really trying to focus on.
Yeah, and I think one thing to be clear about is it's not a conference. You know, like what we're focusing on doing a PMA, a People's Movement Assembly, is about deepening our level of understanding of what the issues are and how can we come to a consensus about how to move forward. You know, so it's going to be like strategy sessions and collective sharing, collective building throughout the course of the PMA. So it's not going to be a bunch of talking heads. It's going to be us sharing our ideas and trying to figure out which way forward.
And folks, I mean, we know most people here you're welcome to come. You got to register quick because space is limited. But if you can't make it, we are going to stream some significant portions of it live. So that's why one of the reasons we're just doing outreach here, you know, because we're trying to connect, you know. We need the allies, we need the support.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I know you produced the every 28 hours, so I'm curious about that aspect. You haven't spoken of like both state repression and you know, the genocidal violence of the United States against Black people and other people. And I was wondering if you could elaborate more also on the connections to the world. You're talking about the Jackson and urban farming, but are you building like ongoing relationships with some of the world, the cooperatives or other, you know, people in the world? And then the third thing was in LA, I'm working on a project with a friend named Steve. You mentioned the local justice lines. Are they coming to your area? Because
So some of them. So that piece, the piece around the repression and the self-defense. One reason I haven't talked about it, you know, like one of the strong points about Mississippi is that's not a message you got to preach, you know, in the Black community. Folks are already there in a lot of major ways and have remained so. You know, they ain't never kind of lowered their guard. They're not in the context that to do that, where they can afford to do that. So there's not a lot of organizing on that level in Mississippi context that we have to do. And then, you know, we got a different kind of approach that we have to take in Mississippi, which some of the stuff in there doesn't necessarily fit. The Lechemonowy resistance and the Operation Ghetto Storm. Our police force is almost completely Black. You know, it's brutal. Just because it's Black don't mean it's not brutal per se, you know. But it is an integral part of the community. It's not like you got a police force in the old days that lived someplace else. Most of the folks live in the community, born and raised in the community. So there's different ways that you do see certain levels of accountability on a community level. But it's also an entry to the middle class, you know, quote unquote, the middle class. And, you know, so there's some class divide in our community around how to deal with the police, who the police serve. So for us, in many respects, it's a much sharper class question than it is your old standard kind of national oppression question, right? Who do these folks serve and why? And so there's an active battle which is going on with the current administration. That folks in a couple of communities are leading far more than we are, just actual people. And so we're in the line of fire to a certain extent, but on the other end. So there's a major push that's being, one of the developer schemes is trying to, they call this thing the Capitol Street Corridor. Where they're basically trying to set that up. And what it's premised on is they were trying to move, some forces were trying to move Jackson Zoo, which is the only one in the state, trying to move that out of Jackson someplace else. But long story short, they wound up couldn't move it, so now they got to. And if you saw a map, it kind of is right on the tail end, the way this place is kind of constructed. If you look at it, it's kind of like a pizza pie. So the zoo is at one end of that, this kind of sharp end of where their development is going along the way. So, and then there's a big old kind of golf course that hardly nobody ever uses, next to this old airfield, right? So there's a bunch of vacant land at the tail end of this development strip where they at. So they're coming up with their plans, but they got to clear it first, right? So this Capitol Street Corridor, what the current mayor did was what do you call that program? What did they campaign? It's largely kind of been defeated to a certain, he had some campaign name for whatever. And basically, they brought in police departments and sheriff departments from other cities to come in and do this intense patrol most of last year and early this year in like 3 neighborhoods, and one of them was in this Capitol Corridor, and applying all the broken windows BS, that they try to bring in. And it was kind of widely received by the homeowners and other folks in the area at first, but folks really started turning on it, I think kind of beginning of this year, because there was a couple of incidences where they targeted and messed up and hit some of the respectable people in the community. So then there was some pushback on it. So it's starting to kind of gradually phase out. So for us, in that kind of context, in Jackson, it's a different orientation of putting the brakes on the repressive apparatus. And one of the things that what we didn't talk about, probably we'll talk about later, but I'll mention now since you asked the question. We were able in December to get the city council to pass a resolution and make a commitment towards Jackson becoming a human rights city with a human rights charter and a human rights commission. And the commission that we built and that they tentatively agreed to, if everything goes according to plan and we do our work right, this commission would probably be the strongest civilian review board that exists in the country. Now that's a minor reform. I'm not promoting that as some revolutionary change in any regard. But what we had set up, and they already were primed with it, because Chokwe, when he was mayor, had already set up the table. It's like, I'm creating a civilian review board, and the community will be elected to those positions. Not something the police will determine or the city council will determine. The community will elect those positions, and that commission will have the power to hire and fire. Right? So we're still trying to push forward on that. We'll see. Check back with it, I was saying, about a year and see how that goes. But that's kind of the strategy of trying to deal with it on our end, which is more or less, contain it without necessarily it's a longer piece of education and struggle to dismantle that whole thing. And given the way it's set up and how many black people depend upon the police and the fire department for jobs, you ain't gonna just eliminate it immediately. So, it's something that you gotta gradually kind of weed people like, why do we need this? Why is this necessary? And that's a gradual process that we have to do. Now, in other parts of the black belt, it's a different question. It is that question. So that speaks directly to what you were asking, Brandon. And so we're definitely, we're part of the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives, which is largely the Black farmers, and working on developing different strategies on how we take, what exists in Jackson and what we're trying to do, and have that be a market for all of what they're doing, so they're not dependent upon having to just to run to Memphis or having to run to New Orleans themselves, just for markets, and they can have greater market entry, through us working jointly cooperative together to do that. So that's a piece that we're doing. But there's a greater organizing campaign that we're working on with a bunch of allies. I'm not going to speak to it because there's some stuff that we can defend ourselves easier than some of those folks can. So I'll just leave it at that. The Delta's a whole different beast. Whole different beast.
How many questions do we have over here too? Here, and then behind you. Did you have a question a long time ago? Yes. Was that?
I did, a number of them were
Okay.
answered, which is.
Oh, okay.
These things should rework, but I did have a question about the June 26th to 28th. We were originally going to go, we live in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, we were going to go to the US Social Forum there, and then saw that it had been changed, and then I had written a note where, it's hard for us to know, we're active, it's not like whatever, but we're older, and I'm white and all that, right? So it's hard, given a restricted number of people, it's hard to judge whether we should go or not. And so that's the question I have. As far as should we go there or not? That kind of thing. We didn't get an answer back when I sent the email, so that's still the question.
Let me answer that by saying this. We're looking for folks who are involved in the kind of the intersection between environmental, who are not in Mississippi, in the intersection between the kind of environmental justice struggle, solidarity, economy work, and labor. Right? So that's what we're kind of looking for folks outside the state. It's a left party anyway, so that helps even more. But that's what we're looking for, right? And folks who are going to be committed, towards helping to build a kind of a broad network. So we've been trying to be very explicit around some of the folks who come in. It's like, look, we're not doing, this is not a come toward Jackson, moving tourism thing. Like, we're not interested in that. Ain't got no time for that. If you come and want to try to do some work, then come on down. You're committed to do some work after that. So that's what I would tell you honestly. So it's open. Basically, just so folks know that it's only about 200. There's 100 spaces which we just blocked. That's just Jackson. That's just, and that's mainly going to be youth. And so there's like 200 spots. Basically, that's why we're telling people to register now, particularly because of how late. Because we were going to, just so folks know, we were at one point going to do and set up to do a whole forum. And it was going to be, it was originally agreed upon when Chocolate was alive. And, we would have access, from that to all the facilities, basically for free or, nominal cost. And when Chokwe died, it kind of changed the dynamic for us. And what ultimately came down to earlier this year, with just some of the overall struggles that the forum is having. It's not something that the foundations are that interested in supporting. So it's having to, raise money through a number of different ways. And so for us, it basically came down to it with what we're trying to move on. We're not going to debt finance nothing. So people was kind of like, no knock on what we're saying. Well, you'll get the money with the registrations. It's like, well, we got to pay for the tents and the infrastructure now, so we can't do that. We're not taking money out of our pocket for something that we don't know is really going to come through, and then we're not sure if 5,000 people going to come. Nobody's quite sure that. We don't know what the future looks like in that regard, but we'll be left with, $120,000 worth of debt. We ain't taking that on. Like, that's not going to be a benefit to us down the road. So we was like, let's focus on the thing that's going to help us move our agenda and move it forward on our terms, and that's what we you know, this is where we landed with what you got. So still very much connected, but it was just like, you know, being realistic with what's gonna be the best use of our time, energy, and limited resources. And what can we do so that at the end of the day, our work is strengthened by what happens with anybody who comes and not something taken away from
Can we just collect? Okay, so we have here, here, and here.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about the longer-term strategy that you've mentioned a few times and kind of how that relates to the immediate struggles. We talked about all of the environmental, racial, economic justice issues that you're up against every day. And a few times it's come around to the understanding of a long-term strategy. And I'm just curious what your sense is, what your strategy, your capacity for really bringing the understanding of the long range into the day-to-day work.
Sorry for coming in late. I'm with the National Lawyers Guild, the Environmental Justice Committee and Labor Committee, and we'd like to offer some, legal assistance for this and going forward. So.
The question is not so much a question as a statement kind of thing that in Eastern North Carolina, some folks got together and started this thing called slow money, and I'm sure you've heard of that, where, if you've never heard of that, it's opposed to fast money, where people with progressive conscience do not want to put their money in Wall Street. And so the community got together and people sort of, for both black and white farmers, they didn't want to borrow from the bank and exorbitant interest or cannot get money from the bank, and they want some money for starting up small things. And it's not like a lot of money, but it's like $5,000, $3,000 for them to start up what they need to do, like to get a truck for their produce or whatever. And it's been quite successful in the sense that slow money sort of goes on to progressive people, both black and white, to lend to local farmers, both black and white too, to continue to grow and we can buy produce locally. And I just thought that there was something like that.
There's a lot of that going on in Mississippi, a lot of different ways. Formal and informal. So that's happening, a lot of the farmers, black and white, they really couldn't survive, without that, particularly some of the USDA subsidies is steadily declining. But that's part of the cooperative culture that's been there. So we are definitely going to try to do some more things and make that more formal and stronger. That's definitely part of our strategy. But I just probably want to take, I don't know, man, any question over here.
Oh, I missed it, sorry.
Yeah, sorry for being late to politics. I guess my question mainly is around similar to what he raised, which is like your experiment in self-determination for one area, right? How much are you able right now to really write that history that is being done and the challenges and what's come forward with it? Especially because I think what you raised earlier, I think is very exciting that, in many ways the struggle against the police state has in many ways has pushed almost like a very narrow Black liberation movement only looks at that without necessarily inherently taking on the whole society, both where society heading and also how the environment is going to impact no matter what the hell we want to do.
That's right.
Right. So, yeah, I guess I'm just more curious about how much are you guys able to really try to concretize what you've already won and gained and all the challenges that come with that, because in some ways, while this experiment seems very exciting about what's being done, and in contrast to, again, narrowing what the movement should be taking on.
Good questions. He left.
I know.
I was just gonna say, so a lot of what we're thinking about with Cooperation Jackson, we take a lot from Mondragon. Our hope is to be the Mondragon of the South. Mondragon is an area in the Basque region in Spain that the whole city is structured. It's cooperatively owned, you know, and so Basque jobs for Basque people, everyone, full employment is kind of like their model, right? And so every industry that you think of, from arts and culture to cooperative banks or cooperative credit unions to you know, building refrigerators, and you know, every industry is cooperatively owned. And if you lose your job, you know, there's a network, you know, where you can be trained. They have cooperative schools to be able to not be left out of the economy, you know. And so it's a full kind of, and that's something that we want for Jackson. That's something that we want for Mississippi. That's something that we want for the Black Belt South, right? You know, it's not. So we're starting where we can. We're starting in the capital because we feel that it can have what we're able to generate here can reverberate throughout the whole state, you know, and throughout the region. You know, but you know, so our thing also too is like people who live in Mississippi can become members of Cooperation Jackson. You don't have to just live in Jackson, Mississippi. You know, so we're thinking broadly about kind of what we're building right now, but how what we're building is going to actualize what we want to see. You know, and so, you know, we're not thinking about just doing mom and pop, like just, you know, 1 or 2 co-ops. We're trying to build co-ops to scale, you know, where we can hire, you know, starting off 10, 20 people, 30 people to hundreds of people, you know, further down the line, you know, but we have to start somewhere.
And the other piece, the long-term piece in what you were saying, I've been surprised in trying to understand why this particular narrowing, you know, the emerging movement is taking place in the way it's taking place. You know, I expected media to do what it does, but I've been shocked that there's been, even amongst, you know, to the extent that I'm connected to it, and with all the work that we have to do on a day-to-day, I'm not as connected to some of that as I normally kind of would be. But it's been a little kind of surprising that it's been, you know, the things I see and I run across, that there isn't a broader framework and a broader discussion around, you know, kind of transformation that's taking place. You know, I think the intersectional piece, that conversation is being advanced. The piece that the demonstration that we're focusing on, you know, say her name, I think was a dynamic broadening. And I think, you know, the aspect of the Black Lives Matter framework, which is about advancing a certain level of criticism and change within the Black community relative to women and queer folks, you know, short term. I think that's a positive thing, but the broader piece of, all right, you know, if the reforms that are executed on the side around the repression are implemented, that's nowhere near liberation. You know, and the broader framework is missing. And so somebody just asked me a couple of weeks ago, trying to think who it was, but they asked me kind of a piece of, people are using it every 28 hours. He's like, you know, it's kind of cited everywhere. I stopped using it, to tell you the truth. If you notice on almost anything I post, I kind of stopped using it. I was never a big follower or fan of Twitter and the hashtag piece. I kind of got dragged kicking and screaming to it. And I still don't find it that effective, but that's me. That's another criticism. But the main piece I think that was getting lost and been trying to figure it out, quite honestly, is, you know, the statistic remains, but the analysis is not being engaged. You know what I mean? And I'm like, is it the medium or is it something we're not doing right? You know, and so when I talk to certain folks, you know, particularly some of the younger folks, you know, just trying to say, hey, we read the work, we did. So I try to engage them in a conversation about the politics. And what I've been noticing is that it was read, people kind of dealt with the politics, but there's still a kind of, I'm with the analysis, and even some of the analysis I've heard has been fairly, you know, radical and pretty good. You know, like what that piece we came and did to LA, there's a little video about that. I mean, I thought most of that conversation was pretty advanced for the United States, you know, context anyway. But folks are still not translating their analysis into a program that matches their analysis. And what that gap is and why it exists, I don't know, man. I'm at a scratch my head moment of kind of like, you know, your actual theory is beyond what you are demanding. You're not demanding enough, you know. And then there's what we've been seeing is two sides. There's what we have to demand, and then there's what we have to create for ourselves. There's two sides of this equation, you know, that we need everybody to kind of look at. We want this younger generation to look at, right? And I just see a gap there. I'm not quite sure, you know, why it exists or how we breach it, you know. So it's, you know, only thing that I think we can do on our end is try to be better at relating our experience and trying to project the model. And so that there's a piece that I did jointly, the Rosa Luxemburg asked to do, and I was, you know, through some push, happy to do Casting Shadows piece that tried to do a little bit of summary on that without overexposing stuff at the same time. Then there was another piece I got asked to do for the Huffington Post when they did, it was in February, they did a Black Lives Matter piece. So there was a short piece where I was trying to connect, you know, like, look at, here's a broader framework. You got to look at the larger piece around self-determination and look at the political economy. You got to look at that. And it seemed to be, you know, somewhat received, but I still, the demands I'm seeing come out, I'm like, you know, and what's funny, to be honest about it, what's funny is like, if you look at some of the demands that I myself wrote 2 and 3 years ago, it's those, some of those same demands. So people are like, well, why are you mad at the things that you were demanding 2 or 3 years ago? 2 or 3 years ago, we wasn't at this moment. You went beyond these narrow demands. So don't get stuck in stuff that's actually going to leave you more limited. Like, you know, start demanding the world and you might get half of it. You know, don't get stuck there. You know, like we get beyond that point. That was the entry point. You know, Ferguson and now Baltimore has taken us even further than that. You know, and we need to be dealing, you know, to where the moment is, not to, you know, some old notions of where we at. Don't get stuck in that framework. At least that's what I'm trying to convey. Like, that's a limited framework. And it was limited because of when I was writing it, this is what I thought was possible. And now more is possible because we've changed the conditions. So how we do that, I'm not quite sure. But all we can do is project what we do and try to get it out there, you know. But I also think, honestly, that I'm in with this, you know, it's a younger generation than us. And they're going to have to figure some stuff out themselves. You know what I mean? So I'm not mad. You know, it's one of the things like, you know, and I remember making those mistakes of not paying attention to those enough who came before me and the lessons they were trying to impart. So I kind of thought I heard, but I didn't quite, you know, like I heard what I wanted to hear and I didn't pay attention to the rest. You know what I mean? And then reality slapped you in the face and like, oh yeah, that was, you know, they knew what they were talking about. So I think it's kind of some of that stuff that's going on. You know what I mean? Of like trying to convey stuff, but like I'm sitting there looking at them like, you're not really hearing what I'm saying. But that's cool. You know, keep struggling. You know, so to me, I'm not disappointed, but I'm just kind of like, we can go farther, y'all. Like, you know, I hope y'all see this moment. We can go further than that. And, you know, whether we are prepared to deal with that and not get sucked up into Hillary's campaign. That's the biggest thing that I fear about what this summer might lead to. You know, and she's positioning herself very well to try to capture that energy. And some of the foundations are sure enough going to help her to capture it as much as they can. So, you know, us teaching that message, I think, is what we need to be concentrating on the next 4 or 5 months.
Can I get a Cooperation Jackson Supports Hillary button?
You have never seen that button will never happen. If I make it, I know where you live.
So I just want to echo too, just really quickly, because you glossed over it pretty quickly, that report that you did though, the Casting Shadows, it is available online and it is very good. It was something I planned to skim and actually couldn't stop reading it. So it's really engaging and interesting, so you can find it.
It's
Downstairs. Oh, is it? Or on this floor? Awesome.
Yeah, they got it on the table.
They have, well, all right. Boom, she found it.
I need to get some more. They gave us like 400 or 500. We're already out of them. I need to get some more. Actually, print some more.
So it looks like we have a little bit of time for people to sign up. Is that right?
Yes. Thank you. Please sign up. There's cards. You know, if you can't do it now, there's a standard card. There's some information here. And then there's just our regular card, the green cards that folks will take, you know, and pass out. And if you can, you know, go over to the Rosa Luxemburg table and grab that paper. I think they got a few of them that's printing here, and it's free. So don't be afraid to take it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were here the whole time?
No, yeah, well, Saturday, I was at the,
Went to March.
yeah.